I found him bleeding on the side of the road, and I knew right then that saving him would either destroy me or set me free." The words tore out of Aria Hartley before she could stop them, her breath forming white clouds in the freezing air as Boston police sirens wailed 7 blocks away. At 2:47 in the morning, on a highway shoulder buried under 18 inches of fresh snow, she knelt in the backseat of her dying 2009 Honda Civic with her hands pressed against the chest of a man whose name carried weight enough to move mountains or bury bodies. Nicholas Calabrese was barely conscious. His eyes, dark as wet concrete, locked onto hers for one impossible second before the pain pulled them half shut again. The scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone caught the dying dome light of her car, a thin white line on skin that had survived far worse than this. He wore a suit that cost $4,000, maybe more, now soaked black with blood spreading like spilled wine across Egyptian cotton. His scarred knuckles gripped her wrist with fading strength, and she could feel the tremor there, this man, built from violence and empire, slowly slipping away. 2 men stood outside in the howling wind, their silhouettes framed in her frosted windows. Marco and Pietro. She knew their names before anyone told her because the fear in Emma's voice when she whispered them told her everything. Tactical gear, weapons, the controlled stillness of men trained for violence. But right now they were useless. Completely useless. Their guns could not stop what was happening. Their power meant nothing in this moment. They could only watch as this hollow-eyed woman with $5 crumpled in her pocket and an eviction notice in her glove compartment became the only thing between their boss and oblivion. Aria pressed her own jacket lining harder against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding that would not stop. Her 3 children sat pressed against the far door like they were trying to disappear into the metal itself. Emma, 6 years old, clutched something small and worn against her chest, a pair of baby shoes, the very first shoes she had ever worn, kept all these years like a prayer. Luca stared at the bleeding man with the eyes of a child who had learned too early that the world could fall apart without warning. Sophie, only 4, did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood her mother's terror, and that was enough to paralyze her. The cold inside the car was absolute. Winter pressed against the windows and seeped through every gap in the frame. Aria's breath came in quick gasps, white vapor disappearing into the darkness. She counted his breathing, something she learned from a YouTube video she watched 3 months ago about emergency first aid. 12 breaths per minute. Then 10. Then 8. The numbers were falling like dominoes. Outside, the blizzard howled. The wind sounded like something living, like something angry. Snow accumulated against the windows in thickening layers, and the world beyond the glass became nothing but white static. The highway was empty. No other cars. Just her dying Honda and the black convoy that had pulled up behind her not 20 minutes ago, and the man bleeding into her lap while her babies watched. His voice came out rough, like gravel dragged across asphalt. Don't move. I'm not moving. I'm right here. Just stay with me. Stay with me, Nicholas. She had never said his name before. She was nobody to him. Nobody. Just a woman whose car had broken down in the snow at exactly the wrong moment, or maybe the right moment. She did not know yet which it would be. Marco appeared at the window, his face hard and angular in the darkness, his jaw clenched so tight it could have snapped diamonds. He was scanning the storm, watching for something. Danger. Enemies. The people who had put this bullet in his boss's chest. Ambulance is 5 minutes out, he said. His voice was clipped. Professional. But something in his eyes, a fractional widening, a barely perceptible shift, suggested he had never seen anything like this before. A woman, broken down and desperate, pressing her jacket against the chest of the most powerful man in Boston. Kneeling in her own car, her children watching. No hesitation. No calculation. Just her hands and her will and the cold. Pietro stood at the driver's side window, weapon raised, eyes scanning the blizzard. 2 vehicles approaching from the north. Don't know if they're friendlies. The words fell like stones into still water. Aria's hands trembled. Not from the cold. From the weight of what was happening. This man, this powerful man, was dying in her car. And whoever wanted him dead was coming back to finish the job. She didn't think about the eviction notice. She didn't think about the $5. She didn't think about Douglas Hale's hands on her waist during the closing shift at Morton's, or his voice hissing in her ear that no one would believe her, that she was replaceable, that she should be grateful for any attention at all. She didn't think about how she was going to feed her children next week or the week after. She only thought about the pressure on his wound. She only thought about keeping this man alive. It was a Saturday morning. The parking lot of the shuttered laundromat in the industrial section of Boston was empty except for her car. The 2009 Honda Civic sat tilted on worn suspension, its paint faded to a color that was no longer quite silver and not quite gray. Inside, Aria sat in the backseat counting money on her lap. 5 crumpled $1 bills. 5. She spread them out like they were precious things. Like they could feed 3 children for a week. They could not. She knew the mathematics of survival the way some people know poetry. Milk was $4 a gallon. A loaf of bread was $3. Eggs, if she bought the cheapest ones, were $2.50. She had $5 and 7 days until the next paycheck. Except there might not be a next paycheck because Douglas Hale had called her into his office yesterday and his hand had found her waist, and she had stepped away, and he had smiled that smile that meant she would pay for the refusal. Emma was asleep against the window, her head tilted at an angle that looked painful. Lucas lay across the middle seat with one arm thrown over his face. Sophie curled in the footwell, her knees drawn up to her chest. All 3 of them wearing the same clothes they had worn yesterday. All 3 of them thin in a way that made Aria's heart do something it should not have to do. Her hands were shaking as she counted the $5 again. Once. Twice. A third time, as if repetition would change the answer. The eviction notice was in the glove compartment. She had opened it 17 times since the letter arrived last Tuesday. The numbers were always the same. $85,000 in back rent and penalties, or she had 7 days before a padlock was placed on the door and her family was put on the street. 7 days. The math did not work. The money did not exist. There was no scenario in which this ended anywhere but on a sidewalk, in a shelter, in a car that would eventually break down like this one and never be repaired. She thought about Douglas's face when she had stepped away from his hand. The smile had vanished. He had called her into work the next morning and told her the tip jar rules were changing. No more tips for her. All tips now split equally among the staff. It was a rule that applied to no one else. Only her. Only Aria. She closed her eyes. Outside, the morning was cold and grey. The weather forecast said snow was coming. A blizzard. The worst one in 7 years. It would hit sometime in the evening, and by tomorrow morning, the whole city would be buried. Aria opened her eyes and looked at her 3 sleeping children. She thought about what would happen if the car broke down in that blizzard. She thought about the math of that scenario. The math did not work either. The sound of an engine pulled her from the spiral. A car door opening. Footsteps. She sat up quickly, her $5 falling to the floor. But when she looked through the steamed window, she saw only an older woman walking past, heading toward the street. A stranger. Nobody who could hurt them. Aria gathered the $5 and held them in her closed fist. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. She just did not know yet that the miracle was coming. She did not know that in less than 48 hours, her world would crack open. She did not know that a man named Nicholas Calabrese was about to step into her life and rewrite every rule she thought she understood about survival, about power, about what happened to people who were nobody and then, suddenly, refused to remain that way. The November wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Aria Hartley sat in the backseat of her 2009 Honda Civic, parked in the darkest corner of the lot behind the shuttered laundromat on Dorchester Avenue in South Boston, and counted her money by the pale glow of the dome light overhead. $1. $2. $3. For dollars. $5. 2 quarters. 1 dime. $5.60. This was everything. This was the total sum of her existence distilled into metal and crumpled paper. Her hands trembled as she performed the calculation she had already performed 17 times that day. For more days until her next shift at Harborview Restaurant. Minimum expenditure, $12 for gas station food that Emma could keep down without vomiting. Minimum fuel needed to get to work and back, $8. The math did not work. The math had not worked for 3 months. Behind her, in the darkness of the back seat, her 3 children slept fitfully. Emma, age 6, curled against the window with her thumb in her mouth, still wearing the same pink dress she had worn for the past 2 days because it was the only clean one left. Her older brothers, Marcus age 9 and Thomas age 7, lay tangled in winter coats that served as both blankets and pillows. Their breathing was shallow, occasionally interrupted by the small, involuntary jerks of children whose bodies never quite relaxed, even in sleep. Aria held the $5 bills in her closed fist and looked at the eviction notice taped to the dashboard. The paper was creased from handling, the words printed in official black ink that seemed to grow darker each time she read them. Final notice. Property foreclosure. $85,000 owed. 7 days remaining or forcible removal by Boston Municipal Authority. 7 days had become 6 days. 6 days had become 5. Now there were 4 days left, and Aria had $85,000 owed and $5.60 in her pocket. The condensation on the windows had begun to fog again. Outside, the temperature was dropping. The weather service had issued warnings. A blizzard was coming. The worst in 7 years. It would arrive sometime in the evening and bury the entire city by morning. Aria had heard about it on the radio at work. She had listened to the warnings while clearing tables and pretending not to notice Douglas Hale's hand sliding to her waist. She reached over to Emma and pulled the winter coat higher, tucking it around the girl's small shoulders. The child did not wake. Emma's sleep was the sleep of exhaustion, the kind of unconsciousness that came when a body had given up fighting and simply surrendered to whatever was coming next. 4:47 in the morning. Aria's alarm on her phone had vibrated against the steering wheel, and she had woken to the familiar ritual of survival. Wake the children without startling them. Start the engine to let it warm for exactly 3 minutes before pulling out, conserving fuel. Drive to the 24-hour gas station on Summer Street, the one with the public bathroom and the clerk named Henry who did not make her feel like she was stealing when she asked to use the sink. She had taken Emma inside first, one small hand in hers, and guided the girl to the bathroom stall. Splashed cold water on her daughter's face and hands. Changed her into the pink dress and combed her hair with the single comb she kept in the backpack that held everything they owned. Deodorant from a dollar store. 1 extra shirt. Underwear for each child. A photograph of their father taken 3 years ago before the cancer had started, before the medical bills had started, before everything had come apart. By 11:30, Aria was at Harborview Restaurant, clocking in for her double shift. The restaurant was the kind of place that existed in the wealthy part of the city, the kind of place where women in silk blouses ate lunch and men in tailored suits conducted business over wine that cost more than her entire monthly rent used to cost. She wore her black uniform, now threadbare at the collar, and moved between tables with the particular invisible grace of someone who had learned that invisibility was the safest place to exist. She was clearing dishes from table 7 when the footsteps approached from behind. She knew the footsteps. She had learned to recognize them in the way a small animal learns to recognize the sound of a predator's approach. Douglas Hale placed his hand on her waist. The touch was casual to anyone who might be watching, the gesture of a manager checking on his staff. But the fingers pressed just above her hip bone, and they pressed deliberately, and they lingered for exactly 2 seconds too long. "You look tired, Aria." His voice was like honey poured over gravel. "Maybe you need some extra motivation to smile more. Customers notice when you look sad." She froze. The plate in her hand did not move. The glass did not move. Her body did not move because she had learned that movement could be interpreted as encouragement or rejection, and rejection had consequences. She was 34 years old but felt decades older. She had worked at Harborview for 8 months, and in those 8 months, Douglas had learned that she was vulnerable. She had learned the same thing about him. That vulnerability was a language they both understood, but they spoke different dialects. His dialect was the language of power. Hers was the language of desperation. "I will smile more," she said quietly. The words felt like swallowing broken glass. "I apologize." He withdrew his hand, and she felt the weight of his gaze move across her back as she walked toward the kitchen. But when she glanced backward, she saw him moving toward the tip jar on the back counter. She watched as his fingers dipped inside. She watched him extract 3 $20 bills and a $50 bill. She watched him slip the cash into his wallet while making direct eye contact with her across the expanse of the restaurant, daring her to say something. Daring her to object. He leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You report anything, and I will make sure you never work in this city again." "Who do you think they will believe? Me or the woman who sleeps in her car?" The words landed like a physical blow. How did he know? She had been so careful. She had showered at the shelter's day center. She had washed her uniform in the gas station bathroom sink. She had parked in different locations, rotating between the laundromat lot, the abandoned warehouse district, the parking garage on Maple Street. How could he possibly know? The answer came to her slowly, terrible and clarifying. It did not matter how he knew. What mattered was that she had no way to deny it. What mattered was that he had stated a fact that was absolutely true. He would be believed. She would not. She was nobody. He was the floor manager of a high-end restaurant in a good neighborhood. She was a woman with 3 children and $5.60 and nowhere to live in 4 days. At 8:45 in the evening, Aria drove to the women's shelter on Bradbury Street. The same shelter where she had stayed 6 months ago, before the shelter had filled with too many women and not enough beds. Before everything had become impossible. The intake coordinator was a woman named Ruth, exhausted in the particular way of people who have been saying no all day and will spend tomorrow saying no again. "We are at capacity, Aria," Ruth said, not meeting her eyes. "We have 40 women and only 32 beds. You have a car. Others do not even have that. Come back next week." Capacity. As if there was a limit to human desperation. As if pain had a waiting list. Aria nodded because there was nothing else to do. She gathered her paperwork and walked back to her Civic. The engine started on the 3rd try, which was better than yesterday's 4th try. She drove back to the laundromat parking lot and parked in the darkest corner, the place where the streetlight had burned out months ago and no one had bothered to fix it. The children were asleep in the back seat. She opened the rear door carefully, slowly, trying not to wake them. She pulled winter coats over their small bodies. She locked all 4 doors. She checked them twice. 3 times. 4 times. Emma stirred and opened her eyes, and in the darkness of the car, she asked the question that Aria had been dreading since the eviction notice arrived. "Mama, when can we go home?" Aria's throat closed. She looked at her daughter's small face, still creased from sleep, and she lied because she was her mother and mothers lie to protect their children from truths too large to carry. "Soon, baby," she whispered. "Very soon." But the truth was different. The truth was that they had $5.60. The truth was that the blizzard was coming. The truth was that there was no home to go to, no solution waiting in the future, no miracle on the horizon. The truth was mathematics, and mathematics was absolute. Aria closed the car door and sat in the front seat and listened to her children breathing in the darkness. The wind picked up outside, rattling the car frame, howling through cracks in the windows. The temperature was dropping. The snow was coming. In exactly 48 hours, everything would change. But she did not know that yet. None of them knew it. The only person who knew it was a man named Nicholas Calabrese, who was, at that exact moment, approximately 3 miles away, making a decision that would bring his entire world crashing down. The wind hammered the Civic like 1,000 fists. Aria gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, watching the wipers fail against snow accumulating faster than they could clear it. The temperature inside the car had dropped to 43 degrees. In the backseat, Emma stirred under a winter coat, her small voice cutting through the rattle of the dying engine. "Mama, I'm cold." Aria's throat tightened. She reached back without turning around, squeezed her daughter's hand, and kept driving. The blizzard had swallowed Interstate 93 by 9:17 p.m. What had been heavy snow at 7 o'clock had become something else entirely, a white wall that erased the road ahead, the yellow lines, the distinction between asphalt and sky. Aria's gas gauge read 1/4 tank. Her pocket held $5.17. The math was simple and absolute. She could drive for maybe another hour before the needle touched empty. She could use that hour to find a 24-hour diner where she might buy one coffee and sit in the warmth for 3 hours with 3 children huddled around her. Or she could drive until the gas died and wait for sunrise on the shoulder of a frozen highway. Neither option was survival. Both were just postponement. At 9:43 p.m., the engine light flickered. Amber. Steady. Aria's hand shook slightly on the wheel. She pressed forward anyway, visibility collapsing now to maybe 10 feet ahead. The snow came sideways, driven by wind that shook the entire frame. Sophie began to cry softly from the middle seat. Lucas, 7 years old and old enough to understand that something was wrong, said nothing at all. Just watched the white nothing outside the window. Then the sputtering started. 3 coughs from the engine. A 4th. The car lurched. Aria felt the power drain, felt the moment when the Civic stopped being a vehicle and became a coffin slowly filling with cold. She eased off the gas, let momentum carry her toward the shoulder. The tires crunched on what might have been gravel or ice or the edge of a ravine, there was no way to know. She coasted for another 30 seconds, the world entirely white now, and then the car stopped completely. Silence. Only the wind. Only the sound of her children's breathing and her own heart in her ears. Aria tried the ignition. The engine turned over but would not catch. She tried again. Again. 6 times, she turned that key, and 6 times the engine coughed and died. The battery was failing. The 4th try took longer. The 5th longer still. On the 6th attempt, the starter clicked weakly, like a dying heartbeat, and then nothing. The dashboard lights dimmed. The Civic was finished. She pulled the children close. Emma on her left hip, Lucas against her right side, Sophie tucked between them both. Aria wrapped them in every piece of fabric she owned, coats, blankets, the threadbare quilt from the back seat. Outside, the wind shrieked. Snow piled against the windows in drifts. She checked her phone, 4% battery, no signal. No bars, no help, no way out. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in some distant future she could negotiate with or plan for, but now. Tonight. On the side of a highway she would never see again, with 3 children she had promised safety to, in a car that had become a tomb wrapped in white. Emma whispered, "Mama, when will we be warm again?" Aria closed her eyes. She did not have an answer. She had never been good at lying to herself, but she was excellent at lying to her children. She whispered, "Soon, baby. We will be warm very soon," and held them tighter while the Civic filled slowly with cold. Then headlights cut through the white. Not 1 set of lights but 5, a convoy moving fast despite the conditions, the SUVs hugging the road like they knew exactly where they were going. The lead vehicle, a Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows, passed within 20 feet of her disabled car. Snow sprayed across her windshield. For a moment, Aria thought they would simply disappear into the white ahead, another ghost on the highway. But then brake lights bloomed red through the storm. Reverse! The entire convoy slowed, stopped. The lead vehicle's driver door opened. A man stepped out into the blizzard. Even from 30 feet away, even through the snow and darkness, Aria could see that he did not belong in this moment. Expensive suit visible despite the storm, tailored cashmere coat, the kind of presence that seemed to occupy more space than his actual body. He took 3 steps forward and collapsed to his knees in the snow. Blood. So much blood soaking through his white dress shirt, spreading dark across expensive fabric, staining the snow beneath him crimson. The rear doors of the second and third vehicles opened simultaneously. 2 men emerged, moving with military precision. The first was built like a brick wall, shaved head, thick shoulders, a pistol visible under his left arm. Marco. The second was leaner, sharp-eyed, with a scar running the length of his jaw like a permanent frown. Pietro. Both moved toward their fallen boss, and then Marco turned suddenly toward Aria's Civic, pounded on her window hard enough to shake the glass. "Do you have a first aid kit? Towels? Anything?" Aria did not think. She opened the door, cold slamming into the car like a physical force, and stepped out into the storm. The man, Nicholas Calabrese, though she did not know his name yet, was struggling to breathe, one hand pressed to his chest, blood flowing between his fingers like water. His eyes found hers for one fraction of a second, and in that moment, she saw everything: the pain, the shock, the fact that he was conscious enough to register that a stranger in a broken car was about to become the most important person in his world. "Get him in my car," Aria heard herself say. "Now." They moved fast. Marco and Pietro carried Nicholas toward her backseat. He was tall, maybe 6'1", and heavy with muscle, and the wound just below his collarbone was catastrophic. Aria tore the lining from her own jacket, the only warm coat she owned, purchased 5 years ago at a Salvation Army for $8, and pressed the fabric against the wound, applying pressure with both hands while her 3 children watched in terrified silence. Emma made a small sound, not quite a cry. Lucas's face had gone completely white. Sophie pressed her face into the seat. "How long?" Marco's voice was urgent, hard. "How long what?" Aria gasped, still pressing. "How long since he was shot?" "I don't know. I don't know anything. I was just 20 minutes ago," Pietro said quietly. "Maybe 22. The wound was bleeding steadily, but not the arterial spray that would have meant death in minutes. The bullet had missed major vessels but had done real damage." Aria kept pressure. The jacket lining was soaked now. She tore the other sleeve of her jacket and added it to the compression, her hands shaking badly. Nicholas's eyes opened again, found hers, and his voice was a rasp. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're bleeding," Aria whispered. "And I won't let someone die in the snow." Something in his face shifted. Recognition. Gratitude. And something else, something that looked like he was seeing her for the first time as a person rather than an obstacle or a convenience. The blizzard raged around them. Wind howled through the open door. Snow accumulated on their shoulders, in their hair, on Nicholas's pale face. And in the middle of all that chaos and cold and blood, a widow in a car that had run out of gas became tethered to a man who would either destroy everything she had left or give her back her life. Neither of them understood it yet. But the moment was already written into the fabric of what came next. The threads connecting them were already tightening. Marco's voice cut through. "St. Mary's Hospital is 20 minutes from here. But we do not go to hospitals. We have a doctor. We have a place." He looked directly at Aria. "You and your children. You come with us. You do not get to say no." Aria wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell these dangerous men in expensive suits that she would stay in her broken car, that she did not need their world or their violence or their involvement in whatever this was. But Emma was crying now, soft sounds of pure fear, and Lucas's lips were turning blue from the cold, and Sophie had stopped responding to anything at all. Aria looked at Marco's harsh face and simply nodded. "Then get them in the vehicle," Marco said. He was already on his phone, speaking quietly but with absolute authority. "Dr. Reeves, Nicholas has a GSW. Clean entrance, left chest, below the clavicle. Approximately 20 minutes old. We are en route to the warehouse. Prepare the back room and have blood ready. O negative and O positive. He will survive this because he must survive this. The drive took 18 minutes. Aria sat in the back of the lead Escalade, holding Emma against her chest, while Lucas and Sophie clung to her legs. They passed through snow-covered streets she did not recognize, turned into an industrial district where shuttered warehouses sat like tombstones, and finally pulled into an underground garage beneath a building marked with no sign at all. The garage door rolled shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Marco led them down concrete steps lit by bare bulbs. The air changed, warmer but thick with something else. Smoke. Money. The smell of a world that existed parallel to the one she had been living in, a world she should never have touched. The staircase opened into a space Aria's mind could barely process. Green felt poker tables. Stacks of cash rubber-banded together in neat piles. Armed guards at every entrance. Men in expensive suits turning to look at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Clear the room, Marco said quietly. They left. All of them. Within 30 seconds, the underground poker room was empty except for Dr. Reeves, a man in his 60s with steady hands and eyes that had seen enough trauma to make him immune to shock. They carried Nicholas to one of the poker tables and laid him out on the green felt like a corpse on an autopsy slab. Dr. Reeves cut away his shirt and went to work immediately, examining the wound, calling for instruments, moving with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Marco gestured to a leather couch against the far wall. Sit. Aria Saturday. Her children arranged themselves around her like frightened animals seeking warmth from the pack. Emma's small hand found her mother's, gripped it so hard the circulation nearly cut off. They watched Dr. Reeves work on Nicholas, watched the blood and the instruments and the terrible fragility of a man who just hours before had seemed invincible. Hours before, she had not known he existed. Now his blood was soaking into her hands, and her children were witnesses to a violence that would mark them forever. At 4:33 in the morning, the blizzard broke enough for the convoy to move again. Dr. Reeves had stabilized Nicholas, had removed the bullet, had stitched the wound and wrapped it in professional bandages. The infection risk was moderate. The survival rate was 90%. But he needed real medical care, real drugs, real monitoring. Instead, he would get this, a back room beneath a poker den, guarded by men who carried guns as casually as other people carried phones. Marco appeared beside the couch where Aria was half asleep, Emma's full weight against her shoulder. Coffee, he asked. She nodded. He brought it, real coffee in a ceramic cup, hot and black, better than anything she had tasted in months. He brought food too. Breakfast sandwiches with egg and cheese and bacon. Orange juice for the children. Emma devoured hers in 45 seconds, her face smeared with cheese, and for one moment, the fear receded slightly. Marco sat across from them. Who are you? Aria met his eyes. Nobody. Just someone who was in the wrong place. Wrong place? Marco's voice carried something that might have been respect. Lady, you saved his life. Do you understand what that means? No, Aria whispered. It means in 15 years, I have never seen him vulnerable. Not once. And you held his life in your hands like it was nothing. Marco leaned forward. Why did you do it? Because he was bleeding, Aria said. And I had towels. Something shifted in Marco's face. His next words came carefully. That man you saved is Nicholas Calabrese. He runs this city. He runs it with an iron hand and no mercy. And you just became the most dangerous person he will ever meet. I don't want. I know. That is why you are dangerous. At 2:22 in the afternoon, Nicholas woke. Aria was still there, sitting in a chair beside his bed in the back room, Emma asleep against her shoulder. Nicholas's eyes opened slowly, focused, and the first thing he saw was her face in the afternoon light filtering through the single small window near the ceiling. You are still here, he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Aria nodded. Your men would not let me leave. Nicholas almost smiled. Smart men. What is your name? Aria Hartley. You saved my life, Aria Hartley. You were bleeding. I had towels. It was not complicated. Nicholas studied her for a long moment, really looked at her for the first time. Saw the dark circles under her eyes. The threadbare coat. The way her daughter's clothes did not fit right. Saw the exhaustion carved into every line of her face like someone had taken a blade and written destitution directly onto her skin. Why did you do it? You did not know who I was. You had your children with you. You could have driven away. Aria's voice came very quiet, because I know what it feels like when nobody stops to help. And I would not let someone bleed out in the snow, no matter who they are. Silence stretched between them. Nicholas absorbed this. Then, where do you live? Aria hesitated. Different places. The truth. Her jaw tightened. My car. We live in my car. For 7 months now. Nicholas sat up slowly despite the pain, his jaw clenching against it. How much do you owe? That is not your concern. How much? $85,000. In 7 days, we are on the street permanently. But I am not telling you this because I want something. I am telling you because you asked. Nicholas stared at her. You will not be on the street. And you will not sleep in your car again. Aria stood abruptly, Emma sliding down her body, still half asleep. I do not need your charity. I do not need to be saved. I am fine. You are not fine, Nicholas said, and his voice cut through like a blade. You are drowning. And I do not forget debts. Not ever. That evening, Aria's phone rang. Douglas Hale. She answered, stepped into the hallway outside Nicholas's room, her heart already sinking before she heard his voice. Where the hell are you? You missed your shift. You are fired. Douglas, please, I had an emergency with my daughter, I will make it up. Too late. Clean out your locker. And do not expect a reference. He hung up. Aria stood there with the phone in a shaking hand, the last thread of stability severed. She had no job. No income. No way to make the money she needed. Marco appeared in the doorway. Who was that? My boss. My former boss. The man who put his hands on you. Aria's head snapped up. How did you? We know everything about everyone. It is what we do. He took the phone from her hand gently and walked away, already dialing. His voice was too low for her to hear, but she caught fragments. Names. Orders. Finality. But what Aria did not comprehend in that moment was that Douglas Hale's name had just been entered into a ledger that would determine the trajectory of his remaining years. A decision had been made in the half-darkness of a hallway beneath a poker room, and that decision would reverberate forward through time like a stone dropped into still water. At 8:15 p.m., a woman entered the back room. Designer clothes that cost more than Aria's car was worth. Hair arranged with professional precision. The kind of beauty that had been assembled rather than earned. Diana Whitfield, early 50s, the sister of Nicholas's late wife, a woman who had always believed the Calabrese empire should have passed to her family. Her eyes moved from Nicholas to Aria and the children on the couch, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Nicholas, what is this? You are running a daycare now? Nicholas did not look at her. This is Aria Hartley. She saved my life. She and her children are under my protection. Diana's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. Protection? She is a nobody. Look at her. She probably staged the whole thing to get close to you, to get money. Aria stood. I did not ask for anything. I did not even know who he was. Diana stepped closer, invading space, speaking quietly enough that only Aria could hear. "You are a leech. A parasite. And I will destroy you before I allow you to destroy what my family has built." "Diana," Nicholas said, and his voice was ice. "Leave. Now." Diana smiled, cruel and confident, and left. But the threat hung in the room like smoke. That night, at 10:22 p.m., Aria finally told Nicholas the full story. She sat in his office, leather chairs, dark wood, windows overlooking harbor lights, and she told him everything. The eviction. The $85,000 in medical debt from her husband's cancer treatment 3 years ago. The shelter turning them away because they were over capacity. Douglas Hale stealing her tips and threatening to fire her if she complained about his hands on her waist during closing shifts. The gas station bathrooms where she washed her children with paper towels and sink water. The lie she told Emma about when they could go home. And then she pulled from her backpack a small pair of baby shoes, worn and faded, Emma's first shoes from the shelter where they stayed after her husband's funeral. The only physical reminder that they once had a home. "I kept these," Aria whispered. "Because without them, I would forget that we were ever anything but this." Nicholas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Then, I grew up in poverty. My father was a violent drunk who used his fists more than his words. I was 12 when I swore no child would ever suffer like I did. Not if I had the power to stop it." He stood, walked to the window overlooking the dark city. "You saved my life when you had every reason to drive past. When helping me put your children at risk. That is not something I take lightly." He turned to face her, and in his eyes, something had shifted. Something dangerous and protective all at once. "The $85,000 debt is gone. Paid. Your children will have a home, food, safety. This is not negotiable." Aria's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this? I am nobody." Nicholas's voice was firm, absolute. "You are the woman who saved my life. That makes you everything." From the doorway, Marco and Pietro watched in silence. In 15 years, they had never seen Nicholas like this, gentle, protective, human. Something fundamental had shifted in the universe. A widow with nothing had given a king his life back. And in return, he would give her a world she never knew existed. But what none of them understood was that Diana Whitfield and Douglas Hale were already moving, already planning, already gathering the weapons they would need for revenge. The freezing rain hammered against the apartment balcony like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop carrying the weight of everything Aria Hartley could not say out loud. It was 11:41 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she stood alone in the dark, her fingers gripping the railing so hard her knuckles had turned white as bone. Inside, through the sliding glass door, she could see the shapes of her children sleeping in their warm beds, Emma curled under a quilt that still smelled like the store it came from, Marcus sprawled across clean sheets, little David's thumb in his mouth, peaceful in a way he had not been in months. But the words would not stop circling her mind. Opportunist. Leech. A desperate woman who staged a rescue to trap him. Diana Whitfield's voice echoed from the charity gala that had spread through Boston like spilled wine across white silk. The speech had been delivered at 7:36 p.m. with a smile sharp enough to draw blood, microphone in hand, old money and society elite hanging on every carefully chosen word. Aria had not been there. She had been here, in this apartment that felt too beautiful, too safe, too temporary, waiting for the moment when it all collapsed and Nicholas Calabrese realized what everyone else already knew. She was nobody. The rain soaked through her shirt, cold biting through fabric and skin, finding the spaces between her ribs where fear lived like a second heartbeat. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She thought of Emma's face this morning, the way the little girl had smiled when she bit into a piece of toast with real butter. She thought of Marcus asking, quietly, if they could stay here for at least a year. She thought of what would happen when Nicholas understood the truth, that she had cost him his reputation, his standing, his carefully built empire of loyalty and respect. Then her hand found the small pair of baby shoes in her coat pocket. Emma's first shoes, worn and frayed, the soles scuffed from the shelter's linoleum floors. She pulled them out and held them in the rain, felt the weight of them, so small, so fragile, yet they had carried her baby through the darkest months of their lives. She remembered the shelter worker who had pressed them into her hands with eyes full of something that looked like recognition. "You are stronger than you know," the woman had said. Aria's hand stopped shaking. She would not run. Not anymore. Inside the apartment, her phone lit up with a text from Marco, "Stay inside. Boss is handling this." Across the city, at exactly 1:33 a.m., Nicholas Calabrese made a single phone call. His voice came out like thunder wrapped in ice, 2 words that would reshape the landscape of Boston's underworld: "Do it now." 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts with purpose. They moved with the precision of men who had done this 1,000 times before, their footsteps synchronized, their breathing controlled, their weapons held low and ready. One unit moved toward Dorchester. Another toward Beacon Hill. Douglas Hale was screaming when they found him. He was drunk, had been drunk since noon, sprawled across a stained couch in his 1-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, ranting into his phone about revenge and lawyers and making sure everyone knew the truth about Aria Hartley. The door did not get knocked. It got breached. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the building like a gunshot in the silence. Douglas looked up to see Marco standing in his living room, flanked by 4 armed men whose faces showed nothing at all. The beer bottle slipped from Douglas's fingers and shattered on the carpet. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that would not come. "Please," he whispered. Then louder, "Please, I did not mean it. I will leave her alone. I will disappear. Just please." Marco's voice was dead calm, carrying the weight of finality. Too late. They did not beat him. They did not need to. Douglas collapsed to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal, as they wrapped his wrists in zip ties and hauled him toward the door. He screamed the entire way down 3 flights of stairs, screamed as they threw him into the back of a black SUV, screamed until his voice cracked and broke into something that was no longer recognizable as human sound. The SUV pulled away at 2:15 a.m. Douglas Hale was handed over to the Rossetti family, a rival organization that Nicholas had maintained a specific arrangement with for years. Men who understood the language of permanent disappearance. As the SUV doors closed and the vehicle accelerated into the pre-dawn darkness, Douglas finally understood where he was going. He finally understood that he would never be seen again. His screams faded into the night like an echo that no one would remember. Meanwhile, 6 blocks away at the Beacon Hill mansion, Diana Whitfield was still asleep. FBI agents arrived at 6:19 a.m. with search warrants that covered 43 pages. They came with forensic accountants and federal marshals, and they came because of what Nicholas's investigators had uncovered in the preceding 72 hours, a decade-long embezzlement scheme that made Douglas Hale's petty theft look like the spare change of a child. Diana Whitfield had stolen $3,200,000 from her own family's charitable foundation. The money had been funneled through 17 offshore accounts, each one meticulously documented by men who understood that the smallest detail could be the thread that unraveled an entire empire. Tax evasion. Wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit fraud. The charges stacked like bricks in a wall with no exit. Diana was still in her silk robe when she heard the pounding at the door. She was still holding her coffee cup, Limoges porcelain, worth more than Aria had earned in 6 months, when the agents came through her bedroom door with badges and warrants. The cup shattered on the Italian marble floor, a spray of dark liquid and broken ceramic that looked like dried blood. "Diana Whitfield," the lead agent said, "you are under arrest." She screamed about her connections. She screamed about her family name, her power, the people who owed her favors and the doors that would open for someone of her standing. She screamed as the handcuffs went around her wrists, as agents led her down the grand staircase where her grandfather's portrait looked down with disappointment in his painted eyes. She screamed as the neighbors watched from their windows, as news cameras arrived with remarkable speed, as her perfect facade crumbled like old plaster beneath a hammer. 40 years minimum, her lawyer told her in the federal courthouse. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. Your family is cooperating with federal investigators. Your accounts are frozen. Your assets are seized. At 8:15 a.m., Nicholas Calabrese stood in his office with the morning news playing on a television screen mounted in the corner. He watched Diana's arrest footage on repeat, the handcuffs, the walk of shame, the reporters shouting questions she would not answer. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Justice," he said quietly to the empty room. "Not death. Too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. She will live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Every day she wakes in a cell, every visitor she does not receive, every door that closes forever, that is her sentence. That is her debt." He turned off the television. By 9:36 a.m., the news had reached every corner of Boston's society pages. The Whitfield name, once whispered with respect in charity galas and country clubs, was now whispered with contempt. The foundation was being dissolved. The family was making statements about their shock and disappointment. Diana's own brother refused to comment, a silence more damning than any confession. Douglas Hale's apartment in Dorchester stood empty, his belongings untouched, his life suspended in amber. His car was found abandoned at the airport parking lot 6 days later. The police investigation went nowhere. His family stopped asking questions after the second week, understanding without being told that some men disappear because the universe has decided they should. Aria did not learn the details all at once. Marco told her first, at 7:13 a.m., when he arrived at the apartment with coffee and that careful expression that men like him wore when they were delivering information about violence. "It is finished," he said simply. "Both of them. Douglas is gone. Diana is in federal custody facing 40 years. The threats against you no longer exist." Aria's hand started shaking again, but this time for a different reason. The rain had stopped. Through the apartment windows, the first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds in shades of amber and gold, painting the city in colors that seemed impossible after so much gray. Emma woke at 8:41 a.m. and came running into the living room, still in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. She climbed into Aria's lap without asking, the way safe children do, and asked if they could have pancakes for breakfast. "Yes," Aria whispered into her daughter's hair. "We can have anything you want." By noon, Nicholas arrived at the apartment with flowers, white lilies and pale roses, expensive arrangements that carried the scent of a world Aria was only beginning to understand belonged to her now. He found her standing in the kitchen with Emma on her shoulders, Marcus drawing at the table, little David stacking blocks that kept falling and being rebuilt. He stood in the doorway for a long moment without speaking, taking in the scene with an expression that looked almost vulnerable. Then he walked to Aria and carefully lowered Emma to the ground, reached out, and wiped a tear from Aria's cheek that she had not realized was falling. "It is done," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "They cannot hurt you anymore. And they will never hurt anyone else again." Aria looked at this man, tall and scarred and built from a world of darkness, and understood something fundamental had shifted in both of them. He was not just her savior. She was not just his obligation. Something dangerous and protective and entirely unexpected had taken root between them, something that had grown from blood and snow and the simple act of refusing to drive past. "Thank you," she said, barely a whisper. Nicholas reached out and gently took her hand. "No," he said. "I am the one who owes you everything." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Boston City Hall, casting sharp rectangles of light across the marble floor. At exactly 10:19 a.m., Nicholas Calabrese walked to a podium positioned on the courthouse steps, flanked by American flags that snapped in the November wind. Photographers erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions that collided in the air like weapons. In 15 years of operating in shadow, he had never given a public statement. His world was poker rooms and dock negotiations and conversations that happened behind closed doors with men whose names would never appear in print. But today, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Aria's annual rent, he stepped into the light. 3 days ago, I was shot and left to die in a blizzard on Interstate 95, he began. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. I was bleeding in the snow with a bullet lodged in my chest. My men had scattered. I had maybe minutes before that cold became permanent. And that was when a 2009 Honda Civic pulled alongside me on the shoulder. He paused. The cameras clicked in the silence. Inside that car was a woman named Aria Hartley. She was 32 years old but looked decades older because life had been cruel to her in ways that leave visible marks. She had $5 to her name. $5. Her children were asleep in the backseat. An eviction notice was dated on her dashboard. She did not know who I was. She did not ask what I had done or whether helping me would destroy her. She simply pulled me into that car, wrapped my wound with the lining from her jacket, and held pressure on my chest while her hands shook. Another pause. A camera flashed somewhere in the crowd. Aria Hartley worked 2 jobs. She slept in her car for 7 months because no shelter would take her family. She was harassed by her manager and had nowhere to report it because she was terrified of losing the job that barely kept her children alive. Every system designed to protect people like her failed her completely. And when I was dying in the snow, she was the only person who stopped. The wind picked up. His tie moved slightly against his chest. I am announcing the creation of the Hartley Foundation, with an initial endowment of $50 million. This foundation will provide emergency housing assistance, legal protection for workers facing exploitation, job placement programs, and mental health resources for families in crisis. Because if a woman like Aria Hartley, who asked for nothing, who gave everything to save a stranger, can fall through every crack in our society, then our society is broken. And we are going to fix it. The crowd exploded. Reporters screamed questions. Nicholas turned away from the podium and descended the steps without answering a single one. Marco appeared at his side, moving with the precision of a man who had protected his boss from bullets and betrayal for 2 decades. In 15 years, Marco said quietly, I have never seen you do anything like this. She has changed you. Nicholas did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the street ahead, on the city that suddenly looked different through the lens of someone who had survived because a stranger chose mercy over apathy. By noon, the story was everywhere. News broadcasts ran it on loop. Mafia boss goes public. Mystery woman saved Calabrese's life. $50 million foundation announced. Social media exploded with speculation, with theories, with the hunger of people desperate to know who Aria Hartley was and why Boston's most dangerous man had chosen her as the subject of his first public act in decades. Within 6 hours, the Harborview restaurant received unannounced health inspections. 7 violations were documented. Within 48 hours, the restaurant was closed by the city health department. Douglas Hale's photograph appeared on news sites next to allegations from 17 former employees, wage theft, sexual harassment, intimidation. His name trended on social media. 3 other managers from different establishments were arrested by federal agents and charged with organized wage theft. The dominoes fell silently, deliberately, like they had been pushed by invisible hands. Diana Whitfield's mugshot went viral by evening. The charges against her expanded: embezzlement from her own charity, money laundering through the non-profit sector, criminal conspiracy. Her carefully constructed image, the philanthropic widow, the patron of hospitals and schools, crumbled in real time. News anchors described her as a symbol of corruption hiding behind respectability. Within 72 hours, her assets were frozen, her board memberships terminated, her foundation dissolved. Aria learned about the press conference from her phone. Emma had pressed it into her hands that morning, excited to show her something from a school project, and instead Aria found herself staring at footage of Nicholas standing at a podium, his voice steady, speaking her name to the entire city. She watched it 7 times. Each time, something in her chest reorganized itself. That evening, Nicholas waited for her at the underground poker room where they had first met, where he had arrived bleeding and she had chosen to act. The green felt table was illuminated by a single brass lamp. The rest of the room was shadow. He stood with his back to the door, staring at the spot where his blood had soaked into the fabric, visible only to him because everything had been cleaned, replaced, restored. "You did not have to do that," Aria said. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "The press conference. The foundation. All of it. You exposed yourself. Everyone in the city knows your name now, knows what you do." Nicholas turned slowly. His eyes found hers in the darkness. "I have spent 20 years making sure no one knew my face, no one connected my name to my actions. But when I heard you had lived in your car for 7 months while people like Diana Whitfield gave interviews about her charity work, something inside me broke. Not broke like destruction. Broke like a crack in a wall that lets light through." He walked to her. Each step was measured, deliberate, the way dangerous men move when they are trying not to frighten someone. "Yes, I did it," he said. "You saved my life when you had nothing. When saving me could have cost you everything. I needed the city to know that. I needed Douglas Hale to spend the rest of his life understanding that his cruelty was witnessed. I needed Diana Whitfield to understand that corruption only hides until someone chooses to expose it. And I needed you to know that you are not invisible anymore. You are not nobody." Aria stepped closer. The space between them felt charged, dangerous, electric like the moment before lightning strikes. "I do not know how to live in your world, Nicholas. I do not know how to be the woman you are rebuilding foundations for. I know how to survive on $5 and hope that the car will start in the morning. I do not know how to exist in the light the way you have put me." His hand reached out and tilted her chin upward so her eyes met his. "Then we will figure it out together. You saved my life on the worst night I have ever known. I will spend the rest of mine making sure you never experience a night that dark again. That is not a debt. That is a choice. That is something I want." Outside, snow began to fall. Not the violent, erasing blizzard of 3 days ago, but soft snow, the kind that settles gently on the city and makes everything look new. Aria reached for his hand. Nicholas took it. His fingers were warm. His grip was solid. And for the first time in her life, she understood what safety felt like. 6 months later, she stood in the parking lot behind the shuttered laundromat where she used to sleep. The lot was being demolished. Bulldozers sat idle at the perimeter, waiting for tomorrow to begin the work of erasing her old life. In Aria's hand was a pair of baby shoes, worn and small, white with tiny pink bows. Emma's first shoes. The shoes she had carried through homelessness like a prayer. Nicholas watched from a few steps away as she placed them in the cornerstone of the new Family Resource Center. The Hartley Foundation's first project. A building that would exist because a woman in a car with $5 had chosen to stop for a stranger. "You kept those through everything," Nicholas said. "They reminded me that we survived before," Aria replied. "That we could survive again." Emma ran to her mother and wrapped her arms around her legs. The child was thriving now, real home, good school, the kind of life that seemed impossible 7 months ago. Lucas and Sophie followed behind her, both carrying flowers to place with the cornerstone ceremony. Nicholas rested his hand on Aria's shoulder, and the photographer captured the moment, a family built from nothing, from blood and snow and the choice to stop when everyone else kept driving. News outlets later reported it as a human interest story, a feel-good narrative about a woman who was saved and then saved herself. But they missed the truth. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Sometimes the people we rescue end up rescuing us right back. Sometimes miracles come from the darkest moments. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to drive past when everyone else does. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow we have another story that will change the way you see the world. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Aria's position. Would you have stopped? Would you have helped? We read every single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop when everyone else keeps driving.